All right, once again, a warm welcome to everyone to today's CSA Briefing and Feedback Session on Safe App Standard, jointly organized by Tech and CSA. Just some quick housekeeping before we commence the session. So the session will be recorded for archival and marketing purposes. So Tech may use some or all of the images or videos in its print publication, digital platform, or marketing channels. So your active participation is encouraged, and we welcome your questions and feedback throughout the session. So now, before we delve into the details, allow me to introduce our presenter for today. So today we have Ecclesiastes Gan, who is a system engineer from CSA Cybersecurity Engineering Center. He led the development of the Safe App Standard, which was launched on 10 January this year. It is meant to give developers and organizations a guideline on how to develop safe and secure applications for their user. So now, without further ado, I shall hand over the time to Ikli, who will guide us through the safe app standards and facilitate our discussion. So Ikli, over to you, please.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Everybody can hear me? Okay, so let me just pull up the PowerPoint slide. Okay, so just to share with you guys, today we'll be sharing about the Safe App Standard that CSA has launched in January 10th. Just to guide you guys through before we dive right into the slides, is that today we'll be talking about the intention of the Safe App Standard, as well as what the Safe App Standard is about, and as well as how we go about developing the Safe App Standard. So it's just kind of like the methodology behind the Safe App Standard. After that, I'll provide a broad high-level overview of what is the content of the Safe App Standard, dive a little bit into some of the key highlights, and then I'll open up the floor for questions. So moving into the slide, the Safe App Standard actually was developed to address some of the challenges faced in our mobile application security of our local landscape. As CSA, we know that this malware scams and phishings on mobile devices have caused a lot of Singaporeans to lose money. It's been published on Straits Times, a lot of other newspaper sites. Everybody knows that Singapore loses a lot of money due to mobile scams. So we were thinking from the process of how can we help app developers and organizations maybe better their security. We know that a lot of people have invested in technology, but we also I want them to know that, hey, there are guidelines out there that are recommended for implementation, and how can we get that and how can we get our application developers and organizations more aware of what to implement. So with that in mind, the Safe App Standard was developed to provide a common benchmark and guidance on mobile application security for local app developers and providers. So we know that mobile application handling high-risk transactions are strongly encouraged to implement these recommendations, and we want developers to know that these are recommendations that they need to implement in order to secure their applications for our citizens. So this standard aims to enhance the protection for mobile apps, safeguarding end users from malware and phishing attempts. I'll go into a bit more detail as to what exactly the contents of this standard consists of, but first we want to share about the methodology. So we didn't want to just release a Safe App Standard or guidance or recommendation without considering what are the issues out there. So for that, before we launched while we were developing this standard, we actually analyzed what exactly is the mobile application scam kill chain. From there, we identified the root causes on the left, and we've also identified what are some effective prevention solutions that organizations and app developers can employ in their applications. So from there, we said, okay, now that we have all of this in mind, we have the root causes, we have the solutions that can be implemented to prevent these, to map it to mobile application security frameworks that are already out there. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, neither do we claim that we are the best at inventing the wheel. So we actually compared our development and recommendations to established frameworks like the OWASP program, specifically mobile application security verification standards, as well as the mobile application security testing guide. We also did some comparisons to the EU sector. So for example, we also compared to ENISA and their smartphone secure development guidelines. And then we also compared to our local heroes like our MAS TRMG. And then we also compared to the PCI DSS, which is more focused on credit card transactions. From there, we actually said, okay, now that we've done all this mapping, now we want to identify some key areas of mobile application security. So we came out with 8. I'll go through them in detail a bit later. But from there, we actually identified the corresponding security controls of the key areas, as well as we developed the best practices and implementation guidelines for each of the security controls that can help tackle the local challenges that our app developers and our people face in general. So what are the key areas that were identified? So very broadly, we identified 8 key areas, and then we split them into 2 versions. For version 1, we actually identified that the main things that we need to do first were authentication, authorization, data storage, specifically data storage at rest, and then anti-tampering and anti-reversing. So version 1 that was published in January 10 consists of these 4 key areas. In the future, for version 2, we will expand it to another 4, which will include cryptography, network communication, platform interaction, code quality, and exploit mitigations. So these are the 8 in general. I will not delve too deeply right now on the bottom 4, but today's sharing will shed light on what exactly is version 1 and what they consist of. So just again to re-emphasize, version 1 of the Safe App Standard consists of 4 key critical areas. The reason why we did this was because these are the key areas that were commonly targeted by threat actors in our ecosystem. So just some examples and some descriptions of each of the key areas. So we have authentication on the left. We really want people to validate user identity and ensure that there's actually legitimate access. So some examples of how you can do this is via biometrics, personal identification numbers, multi-factor authentication code generators. Then we go on to the second key area, which is your authorization. So we want people to define and validate user access rights to relevant resources within their app. When I say people here, it's more of the app developers. And then on the third thing, we want to also help better secure data storage, specifically data at rest. So we want to safeguard the integrity, confidentiality, and sensitive data in the user's device and app servers. And lastly, quite controversial area is anti-tampering and anti-reversing. We want developers to implement measures to prevent tampering or compromise of their applications. So some examples of this include antivirus capabilities, protection against keyboard monitoring and spying. I think all of you have seen how OCBC has done it, whether you are positively supporting it or negatively supporting it, that is up for debate, but that is our recommendation. So before I jump in, the next few slides will showcase what exactly is a high-level content overview of the security controls of each key area. So for example, our authentication key area consists of 6 controls. There are 6. We have divided them, some of the security controls into 1A, 1B, 1C, but just for high-level overview, these are 6 security controls that are recommended for implementation. So just some things to note here, we have recommendations on multi-factor authentication, we have recommendations also on session authentication. I will not dive too deeply, I just want to highlight one key critical security control that we can talk about, is that we want people to use multi-factor authentication to authenticate their high-risk transactions. So why does this matter? Because without MFA, phishing attacks can result in unauthorized access using just one kind of stolen login credentials. By adding layers of identity verification, it prevents unauthorized access even if login credentials are compromised. So there are some recommendations that we have come about, and these are more elaborate and detailed inside the document itself. But just to take abstract out is that we recommend that developers should prioritize the following MFA combinations. So in order of column 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we think that column 1 might be the best choice for developers to take note of. So this implements something that you know, something that you have, and something that you are. Now you can find out more details about this implementation guideline in our document. But then now I'll move on to the next key area, which is authorization. So authorization is much shorter. There are just 4 security controls to talk about. Such one key element to highlight in this is that we recommend implementation of client-side authorization via device binding. So why does it matter? Again, without device binding, a stolen phone can easily compromise sensitive data. So you can log in from any device using stolen login credentials. So we want people to establish a binding between the application and the device. It limits unauthorized access and prevents login credentials from being used maliciously. So moving on to the third area, which is data storage. Again, it's quite short, not too long, just 3 controls. And overall, we just want to make sure that people do store their data securely in proper environments. So something to take note is that we want people to implement secure storage of sensitive data. So why it matters to us is that client devices can have different levels of security, making it difficult to guarantee the same level of protection across all users. So all sensitive data, we believe, should be stored on the server side so that data protections can be easily implemented and applied consistently to all users. And in cases where server side is not possible, well, maybe we recommend storing sensitive data in the client side or the client side's trusted execution environment. We understand not everything can be stored inside the trusted execution environment, so we really want to emphasize that what we are focusing on is sensitive data. And then lastly, probably the most hotly contested or controversial one is that our recommendation of anti-tampering and anti-reversing measures. So as you can see, there are 7 controls here. I'd like to remind most people that although we do recommend these 7 controls, the standard actually is not mandatory. So we are actually releasing this as a guideline recommendation. So if you like, people can look at it and look at it how to implement it. Oh, we want to implement anti-malware detection in our application. Okay, this is how we're going to go about doing it. You can refer to our implementation guidelines for a quick start, and then really just see how exactly you can incorporate all these things to make your app more secure. So before I jump into the questions and more information, I also like to share about what we intend for the future. So we actually started development on the Safe App standard somewhere last year in August. We've done a couple of consultations with internal as well as external people. And then we have actually finalized version 1 somewhere in development. Following that, we have launched it in January 10th. This was version 1 whereby we were really excited as well as stretched for time in order to launch something to the public, to get it out there, make sure that developers have something to refer to, and then we launched it. So following which, now we are in the process where we are fine-tuning and doing specific refinement for version 1. So now that it's out there, people have come to us with comments. Okay, how can we better implement this? How can we implement this? Are there more detailed guidelines that we can follow? So we have all taken all this feedback into consideration, and we have really started fine-tuning our existing version 1 as well as adding on the expansion areas that was talked about just now. So we intend to launch version 2 sometime about a year from now in January 2025, and we'll finalize version 2 in December. So we are currently in the development phase and refinement phase. We're going to probably publish version 2 for consultation sometime in July, and then we hope to get more feedback from the ground as well as from our internal and external consultants. So just to touch on some specific portions before I open up the questions to the floor, there are some frequently asked questions that have been going around ever since we started this awareness campaign. So the first question, the most important thing is that people have been asking us, is this standard mandatory? And I'd like to say that no, version 1 of standard is currently not mandatory. So we want to give organizations time to integrate these security controls and demonstrate their commitment to mobile security. We understand that not all applications need to implement all these controls. So that's why this is also not mandatory. These are basically guidelines. You can pick and choose. If you're not a specific application with a lot of high-risk transactions, you can pick and choose what you would like to implement. These are just generic guidelines all over to address the 4 key areas to make your application more secure. So another key question that we've been getting is that, are there tools provided by CSA to verify compliance with the standard? Well, again, currently organizations are encouraged to use their own tools to verify compliance. We are considering providing recommending tools in the future, but we welcome organizations to express their needs for such tools. And then the third question that has also come up is that, how can I show that my app complies with these standards? So again, CSA is also looking at the possibility of introducing a labeling scheme to certify mobile applications that have complied with our standard. And we welcome organizations to express their interest for this initiative. The more interest that we get, the higher chance it is that we will push this labeling scheme out. So just 2 more frequently asked questions. So again, people have asked us, will there be more security areas in future versions? So I guess the straightforward answer is that yes, we already planned 4 more key areas. These are cryptography, network communication, platform interaction, and code quality and exploit mitigations. This is not to say that we are stuck on these 4 key areas. These 4 key areas will definitely come up. It's just that we will also consider the landscape and evolution of the mobile threat landscape, and we will add areas as we see fit. Obviously, we'll do so iteratively, and then we'll also do so possibly yearly as well, but not without first considering how it will affect the landscape and how we can best recommend it as well. So the last question is, when will version 2 be launched? CSA is currently targeting Q1 of 2025, and we'll be officially opening closed consultations sometime in March, and open consultations will be in July. So yeah, I have reached the end of my slide. Just one final thing to share about. If you are curious where you can get this standard document, you can find it on our website, but you can also scan the QR code on the left and it will lead you to the CSA website where you can download the infographic as well as the PDF of the SafeApp standard. If you don't want to ask questions or give feedback in this chat or in this meeting, you can also scan the Form SG government GoGov QR code on the right, and you can basically fill in some questions or have any specific feedback on a certain security control. You can do so on that Form SG. On the Form SG, you don't have to fill out everything. You can just pick and choose what you like to do and then just fill it out as per how you see and click submit. So with that, I've reached the end of my presentation. You can now open the floor to questions. Okay, yeah, I realized there are some questions on the chat. Give me a moment. Okay, so I think I have a question from Chiwai Hui. So can I get the slides? Yes, we will circulate the slides. I think I've sent Christine a copy of the PDF. She can circulate that as well. Is there a summary of the deviations or more detailed recommendations as standard compared to MAS, MAS-TG? Will the CSA standards be updated? Okay, so yes, for now, we do not intend to have more detailed recommendations because version one is already published. We will definitely have more detailed recommendations in version 2. So for example, some people have been asking us, can we have more detailed recommendations in the multi-factor authentication slide? And we have said, okay, this is something that we have taken note of. And in version 2, we will definitely have more detailed implementation guidelines of not only evaluation technology that has come on board like FIDO, but we also have more detailed implementation on how exactly you can implement these authentications. Okay, so you're asking about differences between CSA standard and MAS vs MAS-TG. So actually the difference that we're trying to highlight here is that, okay, not everything within the MAS vs security controls is in our SafeApp standard. There are also security controls which are not in MAS vs. We have gone down to certain details. Let me bring back the slide if I may. And let me just talk about that in a bit. So if I go back to, for example, let's take authentication, for example. Some of the stuff here might not be in MAS vs. For example, we have context-based factors as well as brute force protection. And then our last one, which is BP06, also has transaction integrity verification mechanisms. So we do add on additional security controls that are tailor-made for our local ecosystem. And then we also have implementation guidelines that is a bit different from the MAS vs. As to your question on how are we collaborating and will we be updated as per MAS vs, yes, we are actually talking with OOPS to see whether we can synchronize on like a mutual recognition. And then we'll see how every time they update, we will update as well. And we are trying to get it so that it's the other way as well, where when we update, they do update as well. Yeah. So I hope I've answered your question. I think someone else has raised their hand. Yes, maybe Tang Yu Hong Gerald, you would like to say a question?
Yeah, hi. Just wondering, what is the direction where these safe standard apps is heading to? I mean, earlier on, I guess over the last year or so, CSA has launched the cyber labeling scheme for home broadband routers and smart hubs. Is this going to hit the same direction as well? Yep, that's my question.
As in, sorry, can I clarify with you? As in, you're talking about direction, as in like where we go on the same direction as the CLS IoT? Is that what's your question?
That's right.
So at this time, okay, let me just share some background maybe. When we first started it, we had no intention of going down that route. We really wanted to get it more of a local awareness and recommendation guideline where we can provide a kind of information resource to our app developers within our local ecosystem. But we do realize that there is a need sometimes from the ground from app developers to actually, showcase that they are secure. So that is why we are also considering that, hey, maybe we can do something similar to what the CLS IoT has done, but not entirely. So we possibly do not want to go down to a nitty-gritty where there's a lot of revision and a lot of pen testing that's being done, because we understand that applications update very frequently, more frequently than hardware routers and smart hubs. So we would think that we do have to take a very calculated approach for how we want to go down this path if we do choose to go down this path. Yeah, so I think there are more questions in the chat. Let me tackle them as they come. Maybe from the first one, Francisco. So version 1 is not mandatory. How about version 2? I can tell you right now that we do not intend for version 2 to be mandatory either. We really still think that at this juncture, this is like a recommendation-based approach, whereby we think that people can use this as kind of a guideline. Okay, these are what CSA is recommending. This is something that we should consider when we do our development. We are not intending to make this mandatory, and even if we do, it should not affect applications that are from the public. That is our stance. Then we have another question from Paul Lee. So, okay, we do actually have gotten these questions about how about offshore overseas mobile application developers. So the first question, easy to answer. Is this app standards applicable to them? I mean, if you are an app developer overseas, maybe in Thailand or Japan or Korea, you can actually take a look at the Safe App standard. You can choose to apply them if you want to use them. We are not expecting to force this down the throats of offshore developers. Our target landscape is actually really local applications. But if you would like to see as an offshore developer, sure, by all means, go ahead. We are very grateful that you are choosing to use our standard. I think there is probably something else that you're asking here is that, what about applications that are based overseas? So we have this question that come up where, okay, our local banks all have banking apps that are local and it's easy to force this down their throat or to recommend it to them. But what about crypto apps? So in that sense, we can't force them to follow the Safe App standard. Our reach and our scope is limited, and we do not want to come on board where we are trying to force people. So at this time of time, we'll always recommend, and then we'll say that, hey, actually, what is the goal of the Safe App standard? Our goal of Safe App standard is to increase the security of our local applications. We do not intend to change that scope anytime soon. We always want to focus on the apps within Singapore and how we can make it safer for Singaporeans. If you choose to use a crypto app that is based overseas, well, firstly, that probably shows they are quite technologically savvy. Secondly, we can't really control things that happen overseas. Yeah. The next question is from Ryan Baxendale. These are recommendations for using NIST restricted authenticators. Is there any plan to align the standard with NIST or similar guidelines to reduce the impact of SIM swapping and jacking? Is there any standard guides for mobile network operating contracts is concerned? Okay, so right now we aren't focused on SIM swap / jacking. The Safe App standard has a very application-based focus because we are not really going to delve so much into the hardware components as of yet. So I don't think we will be addressing SIM swapping or jacking at this point of time or in version 2. We might do so in the future, but the roadmap hasn't been planned out past version 2. So we'll take this into consideration, and maybe we'll try to expand a little bit into the hardware component structure, as well as whether there'll be any other standard or guidelines for mobile network operators. We are going to work quite closely with Apple and Android in terms of their security white papers and their security teams, whereby we actually going to put in some security implementation guidelines from their security white papers. Yes. Is there any plan to remove SMS OTP as a recommended authentication factor? At this juncture, we have kept that there because we did recognize that as an ecosystem, I think we are in a state of transition. People have been, or applications with a lot of high risk factors have been transitioning slowly off SMS OTP, and we wanted to give the ecosystem a bit of time to touch on other factors of authentication before we generically say that we will remove SMS OTP as a recommended authentication factor. So the reason why it's there is because we also understand that certain applications are not so high risk, and the thing that they are trying to authenticate is not so risky itself. So we have kept it there because people are complaining, or people have said to us that at this point of time, we are still transitioning. Maybe you can keep it there because of ease of implementation. So one thing that we're considering in the standards is also not just security, but ease of implementation. So once we are able to get this transition and we are able to see the data of people transitioning, then we'll move on to removing SMS as a recommended authentication factor. On what focus the standard procedure will implement? Coding style, apps, technology like mobile SEO server. Okay, so I think this question is more on what exactly is the focus on. I would say that coding style really isn't the focus. The focus really is more on implementing the specific processes and specific mobile SDKs. For example, the key area on the fourth one, anti-tampering, anti-reversing, you are going to need to, well, have a mobile SDK. And then for the third one is more on implementations on the server side. So these are all more on processes and technologies that you can adopt within your application code structure, as well as application code, but not so much focus on coding style or coding practices. Yeah, Tan Yu Hong Gerald, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess asking questions is faster than typing. So
Yeah,
with
sure.
regards to mobile apps, not all apps are equal. For example,
Yes.
a SingPass app vs a app to book a barbecue pit at East Coast, right? So my question is, with regards to authentication, I think your controls of gating, there's about 10 of them. So is that the recommendation to implement all or none, right? For example, for the barbecue booking app, you probably need a minimal number, right? That would suffice. But obviously for SingPass, you probably have to do that being recommended and more as well. So is there such granular guidelines that will go into details as to what kind of apps and what kind of gating is required? Yep.
Okay, so yes, so this question has actually been asked quite a few times. So I can't really tell you because this is quite private information. So if we're taking SingPass as an example, most of the controls will need to be met by SingPass. That is the benchmark that we are foreseeing. As for whether we will divvy up the standard into a list of tiers on how, like what kind of apps, if you're a weather app, do you need to even fulfill anything? Or if you are like, for example, we just take another government app, ActiveSG, what do you need to fulfill? There are already conversations on this topic. We have kept them internal at this point of time because there are certain, I would say, sensitivity to it. But I think for version 2, there is a chance that you may see a certain tier structure whereby we will recommend that, hey, if you are a calculator app, you're a weather app, and you do not have any sensitive data at all, you don't need to implement any of these controls. Then, for example, if we take that one step higher, if you are like maybe you have some sensitive data, like you have a login page, and you deal with certain house addresses, maybe you need to implement every control within authentication, for example, but you can authentication and authorization, but you can consider maybe to skip the entire key area 4, which is on anti-tampering and anti-reversing. So these are conversations that we are having. We are not going to make anything concrete at this time, but it is likely that for version 2 onwards, there will be a certain tiering structure when the standards are released.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep, I think Ryan has another question. Will the standard be released in a machine-readable format, CSV, JSON, etc.? Oh, this is a good question. As a developer, I understand this. So yes, actually, we are considering, and I will consider launching this in a CSV format. I think it's easy for Python data analysis as well for that, and to just incorporate directly into your governance schemes. How can we get involved in providing feedback and consultation on version 2? Very good. This is the executive crowd questions that I love. Okay, let me just share with you. Let me just share with you the PowerPoint slide again. So the best way to get out and give your suggestions is through the Google form on the right. Sorry, not Google form, the government form SG on the right. That's the best way. Either that, I'll drop my email in the chat, and then you can always reach out to me and then provide feedback, and we can go on a back and forth. You can do a private meeting as well with the team, and then you can really contribute to us as an organization and to. Well, we always appreciate feedback, whether they are constructive or not constructive, and we really hope that more people would be interested in helping us out, because we don't claim to know it all. We are merely trying to help the environment be better. Yeah. So if you can scan the QR code, I'll drop my email in the chat. But if not, are there any more questions? Let me see.
So may I suggest that once the version 2 consultation is ready, perhaps you can reach out to SGTech. We can also disseminate the information to all our members again.
Yes, of course.
For them to express their interest.
Yes.
Thanks.
Just to set some expectations, we do intend to start consultation of the first draft of version 2 within maybe sometime next month, maybe towards the end, or sometime early April, one of the two.
We'll wait for your update then.
Yeah. Any further questions from the floor?
Seems like we have no more questions from the floor.
Yep.
So thank you everyone for attending this session, and thank you, Ikli, for sharing this insightful information. Yeah. So if there's nothing else, then we shall end the sessions right